History is loaded with the stories of imposters, fraudsters, and outright liars. Princess Caraboo, an Englishwoman who pretended to be a princess from a fictional island. Frank Abagnale Jr., who in his career impersonated a pilot, a doctor, and a lawyer, just to name a few. Victor Lustig, who sold the salvage rights to the Eiffel Tower. Twice. And my favorite from the Gullible file, David Hampton, conman and robber, who convinced a number of people in the 1980s that he was the son of actor Sydney Poitier. Subject of the play and movie, 6 Degrees of Separation. But none match the chutzpah of Stephane Bourgoin, the serial killer expert who fooled the world. If it weren't for the Fourth Eye, a group of true crime enthusiasts in Bourgoin's home country of France, he might be still chugging along today. The group exposed Bourgoin for the dangerous fraud that he was. In 2022, author Lauren Collins wrote The Unravelling of an Expert on Serial Killers for The New Yorker. In August 2024, Bourgoin was the subject of a National Geographic docuseries named Killer Lies. Please join our host, Jim Sulanowski, as he welcomes the producer of Killer Lies, Ben Selko.
So welcome, Ben, to Murder Most Foul.
Thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Before we begin to unpack this amazing story of Stephane Bourgoin, why don't you tell my audience how you came by the story and how you decided it was a good subject for a documentary?
Yeah, so I came to the story, it was actually brought to me. Obviously, Lauren Collins of The New Yorker is an American journalist, but who's been living in Paris, France for some time. Did an incredible long-form piece on Stephane Bourgoin a few years back. That article, Condé Nast, which owns The New Yorker, has the entertainment division where they take stories and find production partners to develop them and package them and take them out to the world to try to make documentary television series or scripted series out of it. So, their entertainment division partnered with Lauren and then found a production company called Left Right in New York. And they developed the materials further into, a 3-part documentary series that, they took around to, the HBOs, the Netflix, the Amazons, the Nat Geos, the Hulus, and found a production partner to finance the story. And once they had pitched it successfully, had a budget, they went looking for directors and showrunners. And so I'm not sure how my name came up with them. I've been doing documentary film and documentary series work as a showrunner and director for a long time. And so, had an opportunity to interview for it. So I came in and first interviewed with Condé Nast, Left Right, and Lauren Collins, gave them my take on the project, and then had an opportunity to pitch Nat Geo, who was our production partner at the time, my vision, take, and interest on the subject matter. And normally I don't do true crime because, I have some ethical concerns around how the genre, does a lot of things. But this one, always had the meta component to it, which was it allowed it to look back on the genre itself through a true crime story. And I really felt like that was a sophisticated story mechanism and a way to kind of explore the genre with critique, which is the exact thing I was interested in doing. And obviously a partnership with The New Yorker, which is my absolute favorite magazine in the world. And, something I've been, stacking up next to my bedside forever, not always being able to get through all of the content within it. It was a dream opportunity to partner with them. I had done a lot of work with National Geographic on a series called Traffic with Mariano Van Zeller. I was one of the original executive producers, and I directed the pilot for that show, which went on to air for 5 seasons. With one of the most nominated unscripted shows of all time for News and Docs Emmys. And so I had a good reputation at Nat Geo as well. So I think all of these forces, coalesced and, found good fortune. And I was, privileged enough to be able to, help, helm the team, and I pitched myself as not just a showrunner, but as director showrunner, where I wanted to be the main driver of the creative, but I also wanted to be responsible for budget, schedule, staffing, personnel, so that, you're creating a kind of a frictionless system to execute a vision. We had a lot of stakeholders between Nat Geo, Condé Nast, and Left Right. So, I was able to kind of align my role to one creative force, one kind of logistical force, and, be a partner with all those folks to take the series forward.
So now let's talk a little bit about the person involved, which he has his own. That's what amazed me about, again, and all my stuff before looking at the documentary, of course, came from the article in New Yorker, and then he's got a persona that went on for a long, long time, and then we'll get into the fourth eye of he would have just continued to do it. So it's amazing that this amateur group that had nothing going on. I mean, they didn't have a pony or a dog in the race, and they did this investigation, which then again dovetails into Lauren Collins' article and your involvement. So give us a little background on our poseur.
So Stephane Bourgoin is a really interesting fellow, and I've spent a lot of time with him in person. And he at the time was living in west of Paris, towards the coast. I remember first calling him up with, I have a French producer I was working with who was bilingual, a journalist from France living in America. Jennifer Luby, who is an incredible force in this, is someone who, is of France and the culture, and a very, very dogged journalist, a very dogged filmmaker. And we called Stephane up and he answered, and we talked to him for, hour and a half and pitched him. We never thought he would participate in the project, and we were able to successfully pitch him, and we made a date to go visit him. And so he is someone that has quite an intrepid history. He comes from some wealth in Paris. So he grew up with money, went to some very fine schools in Paris, but, grew up in the late 60s, 70s, and kind of, artistic revolutions happening in France. And he was really a part of that counterculture and really kind of rebuked the class and status he grew up in, and, started being interested in independent cinema, in literature and books and music, and, came to America, fascinated with America because he was bilingual. So he had traveled and come to America in the 70s, really was a big consumer of American culture and an importer of it too. So he would bring back these things for his friends and host, he'd host these salons in his house and, talk about the latest things going on in America and kind of counterculture and independent film. He loved B movies, Roger Corman, all the horror genres that were coming up. And he also worked at a crime fiction bookstore. And so he became really consumed with the crime fiction genre. So this is before true crime being the nonfiction documentary version. This is, so he was an encyclopedic knowledge of crime fiction. So he was exposed to this, the dark world of murder and serial killers and horror. And obviously his journey in the States and in early 80s in France coincides with this kind of boom of serial killer culture and a beginning of an understanding in American society is, and the film expands why, serial killers became a phenomenon in America, expansion of highways, more travel, and all of these other reasons, so that, you have this kind of and producing a better system of law enforcement where departments are now starting to connect, and they can connect all these isolated crimes to actually align them and realize it was the same person. And so you have a wave of serial killers who are capturing the public imagination, capturing FBI. And then you have in the 90s, you have the FBI really dedicating resources to this. And Stephane Bourgoin is tracking all of this. He's totally interested in this. And he's always moving between the real world of what's happening in serial killers and law enforcement and in the news and the headlines, but also what's happening in cinema. And you have, a seminal film, Silence of the Lambs, which is, takes the serial killer and makes them not a degenerate, but this kind of sophisticated superhero, anti-hero, if you will. And, Anthony Hopkins gives an incredible performance and kind of captures everyone's imagination. And in that film, Stephane saw that in France. I have his press notes. He went to the premiere of it or saw some special screening of it either at Cannes or in Paris. And he's got this, PR material all in French, but it's all Silence of the Lambs. And so 1991, 92, 93, his mind starts to really, see what can I do with this? And so he gets with a couple other filmmaker friends and they decide to make a documentary film about serial killers in 1993. And you can't get access to them in France. And even they were very, very rarely the phenomenon hadn't popped quite in France. It existed for sure, but because their police departments were not speaking in a national system the way it was in America, and prisons were much more restrictive in terms of press access, they decided to come to America. So they pitched a French broadcaster, raised the money, came to America, and shot 3 or 4 or 5, major serial killers in Florida and California, assembled a documentary, brought it back to France, and thus began his real entry into true crime in the sense that he was making a documentary film about serial killers. But it was peculiar, his behavior according to the crew, and you'll see it in the documentary series, where he attached fascination to these killers and how he engaged them to solicit the interviews, make them comfortable, quote unquote, started to reveal something about his own character, which was something that I think most folks down the road don't attach fascination to serial killers' methodology of killing. It may have private fascination, but externalizing the grimness, the salaciousness, the violence, without kind of affect was a real key to some of the crew that something wasn't all right. But he parlayed that experience into writing, he done the research, turned that into a book, turned that into a journal. So he created himself as this kind of serial killer expert. And again, he's importing a lot of stuff from America and introducing it to the French, who are finding this fascination with it. And then this kind of French wave of serial killer starts to emerge. And he's the first person to press call because, he's been establishing this kind of, I would say independent, low-level celebrity around that and expertise. So one article leads to one article, and a TV appearance leads to the next one. And, and as we explained in the documentary series, bookers on television are like, well, who do you call? You call Stephane Bourgoin when there's a big crime spree or there's a case to comment on. So he becomes this kind of, unintended expert on serial crimes, serial killers. And a lot of it is, information he's gleaning from, FBI profilers in America. But because he's bilingual, and most French at this point are not, because at that point, French was a diplomatic language of Europe. There was no need to learn English. That came much later in French history, way into the 2000s. So he sits as this unique figure who can, glean all this stuff from America, translate it for the French, but starts claiming a lot of his own. So that's from the plagiarizing, the kind of aligning of his stories with their stories and making claims that, actually FBI profilers made, and Stephane starting to pass that off as his own, where his expertise starts to corrode a little bit and starts to, move into the impostor or the kind of scam artist around it. But he's always riding this line of actually, grounding something in truth and real knowledge and expertise, and then, is seduced by attention, seduced by, faux celebrity, and is, taking these big reaches and grabs and going too far with, what he claims to be his own personal work and knowledge and experience versus something that was actually an investigator's. And obviously, one of the main, people he, rips off is a profiler from South Africa named Mickey Pistorius. And in the 90s, he goes and documents a series of South African serial killers, tracking with, the special unit there, and especially this one, forensic psychologist, profiler, law enforcement, Dr. Mickey Pistorius, who's a genuine expert, in her field, and starts taking her stories, translating them into French and passing them off as his own. And again, this kind of pattern of betrayal, pattern of acquisition of other people's narratives, and as many would call him, a voleur de vie, which means a stealer of life. And obviously that has a double entendre, not to invoke the French further, but a voleur, stealing the life, the story of someone, but while trading in a space where people are literally stealing people's lives in the form of serial killers. So this voleur de vie is this French term to describe Stephane Bourgoin that is, articulated by, the fourth eye. So Stephane becomes, a celebrity that, has a magnificent rise within French culture. And then, obviously, this crash that we see that's evidenced in the film. And I'll just add one thing. And what I think is so interesting about this story particularly is it almost to the date, Stephane's rise into the cultural zeitgeist matches the rise of true crime. Like the inflection points where true crime and crime are capturing public attention, where cable TV is now, whether it be, the Menendez brothers on Court TV, whether it's the OJ trial and the OJ chase, the TV and entertainment are starting to, form and fuse with true crime in the news. And then it becomes a podcast serial, the podcast serial becomes this like huge phenomenon just as as podcasts break. And then you have the true crime prestige television wave happen. You have the prestige wave, and then you have the lower hanging fruit, and then you have the journalism stuff, the Datelines, the ABC, the 2020s that have been doing that for since the 90s or earlier, or maybe even the 80s. The 80s and forward, you have like the news journalism magazine serial crime profiles. Then you have like the Discovery IDs and the Lifetime and Hallmark and Oxygen, doing these kinds of more salacious, ripped from the headlines, but very, very popular. And then you have like the Netflixes and HBO entered the fray and doing these the higher form prestige true crime. And, it's still one of the dominant genres of, unscripted, nonfiction content. And Bourgoin rides that wave for his own popularity until, kind of flies too close to the sun and crashes out.
Now, one of the things that we should pick up right here is that one of the things that added to his authenticity, he claimed from the beginning that he lost a loved one. First it's a wife, then it's a girlfriend, doesn't matter, because it's not true. But that he lost a close friend or lover to a serial killer. And you could put it on his business card everywhere. That's when everyone knew that, oh, well, he's authentic. He knows I lost my daughter, I lost my husband, I lost my whatever, because he is one of us. So I didn't want that to go. No,
that you're right on. You're right on. That is exactly the kind of, ace up his sleeve to continue the ruse, because he carves a specific lane, not just as an expert because he's, bilingual, and actually, he's tracking the kind of cultural zeitgeist of this way earlier than it's happening in France. He's a huge part of introducing it to France. It's not just the Silence of the Lambs company. He takes this thing, starts making documentaries, introduces it to France. But exactly, the unique thing is that he's not just an expert, he's also a victim, right? He's a victim survivor in the sense that he makes a claim that in the 70s while living in America, his love of his life, his girlfriend, is horrifically, discovers her horrifically murdered at the hands of a serial killer, participates in the investigation. And, she lays claim to this, that he's a first person witness to the loss, trauma, and, negative feeling around it. He's, it got him it's an origin story of motivation to be in this field. He's a crusader, an advocate. And then eventually in France, he injects himself into, survivors, groups and leaves them, and that was like, I think that's where the biggest pain threshold was inflicted, was where, he's posing as a fellow survivor of serial killers with real people who have lost, people or have been attacked themselves. And Dahin Asai, one of our main characters, who, but aligns them with them, and pretends to be an expert and a advocate, and, is confided in, and is, again, just kind of sabotaging these, very, very, should be guarded rules of trust. And he's totally exploding that. But it also made him, one of the things that, in reflection, when he goes on television, you don't ask someone, to verify their pain, right? You don't ask someone to verify. So it becomes unassailable. So he can say these things, and rationalize his morbid fascination as he describes it, because he has this origin story. And who's going to have the gall or to be that uncouth to assail it, critique it, fact check it? It's a failure of journalism ultimately, because that is your responsibility as a journalist, as a host, as a booker, to know that the person who's making these claims is authentic and reliable. But that's part of how he got over.
The question at this point, when you said I pitched to him that you're going to do this, did you give him at that point? Were you going to? In other words, did you know you were covering the fourth eye and we're going to go all the way to the end?
I think he was self-deluded to think that would be the outcome, because that's the part of the mechanics of how his brain works, is that either he can lure you, he can seduce you, he can compel you to see his side and see him as a sympathetic figure. No, I said we were interviewing the fourth eye. I was very clear with him that we were, turn over every rock, that it was based on Lauren's article. And he claimed which not to have read. And Lauren's obviously article is not particularly flattering of him. So he had all the facts, but I did, I don't look at it the same way. I don't think we screwed him at the end. I think he had been kind of like blacklisted and shunned. So he was not getting any attention. He was used to a lot of attention. And here comes this American, documentary crew, very interested in his story. I think that was very compelling to him. I think that, that was flattering. And I think that whether he thought he could handle me and, but we did but he submitted himself to, we did like 7 or 8 hour interview in his garage, where the master interview happened with him. And we submitted all kinds of things. He could have walked out of that interview at any moment. He never did. We came back a second and third time. He invited us back. So he, to his credit, he didn't run, right? He, and again, that may be hubris. That may just be a character blind spot, or the attention is worth it, or laughs hurrah, he wanted to write a response. Whatever the rationale was, I give him credit for not running. Like, he could have just ducked the whole thing, and he came to Paris and we filmed him in Paris, but I wanted to give him a chance. Maybe there was something that was not discovered. Maybe there was truth to this story, or maybe he had contrition, or without qualification. And so I gave Mike every right of response to that. And in the fourth eye, who, maybe we should talk about is...
Let's bring it. Were they really kind of the first? I mean, other people probably question things, but they can talk about their genesis, and they came together and explain that again in the documentary. Several of them are wearing masks, so they don't want to be identified. I don't blame them.
All right. So just at a high level, the fourth eye essentially is a, kind of an assembly of true crime fans, and many of them, especially Stephane Bourgoin fans originally, right? So, who came together, and not uncoincidentally during COVID, when everyone was stuck at home, a lot of time on their computer, and starting to kind of pull at the strings of the story a little bit, and then found each other through, different true crime message boards, and, just started passing each other assignments and digging. And people had different kinds of skill sets. Some was good researchers, some, were, kind of scholars of his work, and then Ma, as being bilingual, had a superpower where she could find the English text versus his text, find the kind of plagiarism comparisons, or the kind of appropriation of other stories. And, she came very valuable that way. Another person was very good at internet research. And so they collected themselves, and, and I think we're driven by betrayal, right? I think that trust and betrayal are kind of key themes in this whole story, and key themes in true crime in general, because so often, there are people who are known, who, violence, more likely the victim is and the perpetrator know each other. That's more often than not. And so trust and betrayal become core themes of really truly understanding true crime. Certainly understanding the dynamic between the fourth eye and Stephane Bourgoin was this sense of betrayal, that we've been fans of this genre. We've been fans of you, and you have been misleading us and betraying our trust. Fueled by being locked at home, fueled by the isolation of that, and they built some community around this crusade to understand what was the story here, and they felt a protectiveness of the woman Eileen, who claimed, this one picture that that Stephane was circulating as his lover. Who was this woman? And was this really Eileen, his past lover? Was this someone else? And if it was someone else who was nothing involved in this, how could he do this to this person's image and, say that all these horrible things to her had happened? And so they felt a protectiveness around that, and a rationalization to, pull at all the strings of his story, and then collected this, really substantial set of evidence. I think it was like a 90-page dossier of, literary analysis and areas where he, had overstepped. And they submitted it to French press, who, they tried to submit it anonymously. That didn't go over very well. So they're, kind of taking on a public figure, as anonymous people, and were, mostly ignored. And it took a long time before anyone kind of picked it up, paid any attention to it, and started giving them any publicity. And then, once it was kind of verified by other press, that's what that kind of led to his fall. But they were, staying anonymous themselves, and, this kind of shadowy group. And so, they were undermining their own kind of integrity from the viewpoint of the press, even though their work had a lot of integrity, had, good intentions, and, was very fastidious. The New Yorker was like, oh, this is legit investigative work. And so, and that's why Lauren Collins felt so Like she wasn't just giving air to a group that had no basis or no credibility. She had a lot of credibility, and not just in motive, but also in the outcome of their work, in the dossier that they produced. So they were, so we interviewed 3 of them, and they gave us really great insights into the process, the things that they're fixated on, and the why. And I think they're all feel like underdog characters, people of in a victim class themselves, and felt a lot of how important it was to honor the victims in these stories and to protect them, and to kind of take Bourgoin down for his abuse of their trust. Yeah, so I think Stephane Bourgoin, you try to look and aggregate what are his crimes, right? So you have this kind of more esoteric question of betrayal of public trust, right? He passes himself as an expert with his origin story. Now, very specifically, where he's had 2 real major instances of abuse of trust and our crimes is in the case of Dr. Mickey Pistorius, who's a South African forensic pathologist and psychologist who's worked with the South African law enforcement to help track serial killers, and became profiler is a kind of reductive term, but someone who uses like patterns and behavior, good police work, detective work, interview technique to help understand patterns to help catch South African serial killers, and she applies that science more broadly in a global sphere. Read a number of books. He was really celebrated. He made a documentary about her work in South Africa, but in the course of that production, she told him stories about investigations and investigative techniques. He then wrote he wrote both an unauthorized biography of her based on her own autobiographer. So she gave him a galley of her autobiography. He then took that, translated it into French, essentially, and told her story for her, sold it, didn't have her participate in the profit. So there's a kind of theft of intellectual property for profit. And then there's, along the way, him going on to, various, appearing on television appearances in France, relaying stories of his own involvement in solving South African crimes, which he never did. He only went there to look at crimes that have been solved, and they were revisiting them. But he was claiming he was essential in the solving of a number of these crimes. So, kind of complete abuse of trust and privilege there. So Mickey Pistorius and all the work in South Africa, again, using the English to French barrier as a way to get over, is a major set of crimes. Crimes, again, he was not prosecuted for, but, clearly, it's essentially pretending to be a police officer or detective and then stealing someone's stealing Dr. Mickey Pistorius' story. That's one instance. Perhaps even the more egregious version is, using his lies about his origin story of someone who was a lover of someone who was killed by a serial killer, and making that claim is why he's doing all this, and the grief he's feeling, all of these things that he still maintains. He then created this victim survivors group that he was a part of, started creating television programming around. And there's one specific woman, Tahina Sai, who survived an attack by a serial killer in France, but was abducted, attempted to be sexually assaulted, when she's 13 or 14 years old, like a young teen. And the police blew her off. She was someone of mixed race and descent. In France, of course, blown off, she looked like a woman, all these things, rationalization that, patriarchal racism, all of these things that can be allegated against the law enforcement that, helped process her. But so he took her case on, gave it air, helped her try to find advocacy in the world, seemingly good stuff, but also, again, saying, I'm also a survivor. She confided in him and sought solace in him. And so really, broke her trust in, him just kind of taking advantage of all of that. And then, being the, I think gaining access and credibility, in media circles by saying I'm this victims survivors group organizer, all feels like really, really, rapacious and, pardon to use the word in this context, but, in terms of just really slimy stuff. And so it's that moral injury that, you can kind of summarize Stephane Bourgoin's, crimes as, and again, probably not all of it prosecutable, but the moral injury, the re-traumatization, and then the profit around it too. Because I think also with Tahina Sai, he took her story, helped co-write a graphic novel uh, to profit off of, and she was not participant either in, approving it or okaying her story to be used that way. Certainly didn't appear in, it didn't have any editorial control, and then wouldn't participate in the profits. Eventually, they yanked that graphic novel, but it was, a really egregious exploitation of her story for profit, without, again, completely patriarchally, destroying any agency or consideration for her. So those are, that's how I kind of hold his crimes.
And when he's asked about any of these things, he shows no, I mean, he has this, well, I'm sorry if that hurt her, I didn't mean to, or whatever. Next question. It's like am I wrong? Again, I only watched the documentary once. I'll be watching it again. I love it. But that they, killer lies. But did he ever really accept, yeah, maybe I shouldn't do that? And you remember?
It always felt like apology with qualification, right? So contrition with an asterisk. And so that always, that doesn't do it. I mean, I'm a father, like when we apologize to our kids and try to repair, and when they and reciprocally, when we ask for apology, it's not with qualification. It's not with a but. It's not with there's a context to it. Straight apology. And so it never felt like I truly got that. Or he claims, I've given an apology. Why do I need to do it more? So it always felt like the more time you spent, the contrition kind of eroded over time, or he wanted just to add one more thing to it, or a reason why to mitigate his culpability and everything. And, he's at one point, he'll at certain points say, I'm wrong. I was wrong. I shouldn't have done that. Now, and then usually a but follows.
There was a but. And one of the things that, again, maybe I've got this wrong, I've got a jumbled brain about it, but didn't eventually either the fourth eye or other people who are, again, trying to zero in on the first lie, if you will, the girlfriend that was killed, didn't someone finally find a picture of him and a woman, and it turns out to be a woman that's alive? And that, or at least was alive, wasn't quite killed.
He would use that picture. He on television, he was, you're doing a documentary about him, and he pulls out this picture of this, gorgeous woman and him holding her head. And then, he's obviously a much younger version. It's a black and white photo, and says, this is the woman that was killed. This is the love of my life. So that picture becomes this own character, in the sense that this is supposedly the evidence. It's not evidence of anything. It's evidence of him in a picture with another woman. Now, there were stories that he had worked in the pornography business in America and in France, and had some adjacency to that, or helped assist some American pornography shoots in France. And so he'd, been around that world. And so who was this woman was the question. And it wasn't the fourth eye. It was actually us that figured it out. And we, contacted her, and, through her lawyer, and she declined to participate, which was a request we completely honored, and understood. And so,
but she's alive.
Yeah, definitely not the love of his life. I think that's all fabrication. And, not someone who knew him well, not someone, and someone who's certainly alive, obviously, and he will go on to say that, yeah, I lied about the photo, but there was a woman, so then it becomes like the woman in Niagara Falls. So, I think he admits that the photo is inauthentic, but that the story is true.
Okay, fine. You get caught in a lie. We know people who do that, and they have a spin to it. But I'm just amazed that you did your detective work and found her. But through all these television things, he never caught any of the programs and said, wait a minute, that's me.
Or she chose not to give it air. Maybe she decided not to give it oxygen.
Didn't want
to.
I can understand that too.
They, stay away from it, keep her own life, her own lane, without the kind of
In the end of the documentary, and that's why I think it's the first time we see you. I don't know if they do a reverse shot, if you did a reverse shot anywhere else in the documentary, but I'm seeing this person on site there on the patio, and Lauren, it's her final interview with him, and she's covered being nervous. I don't blame her. And she said, I'm going to sit down on my list of questions that I'm going to ask him and whatnot. And he's bringing this in and come on down and do it. And you're leaning up against a fence or something. You're asking your questions. She's asking hers. What was that set up? I mean, first of all, you had to set up, right? So you're doing mics and all that. So you're chit-chatting, whatever. I mean, I've done enough, tech work on videos to know, oh my God, take us 20 hours just to get this one shot set up. So you're there with him. And again, but you've already done the interview. See, I wasn't sure of that. So you were involved you didn't put that to someone else. You were in the room. So this was not your first meeting. But what was that? Was that kind of like the final time you talked?
Yeah, it's the final reckoning. Lauren had written the article. It was her opportunity to essentially add a coda to the article, through our storytelling, through our documentary series. So yes, we had done the big master interview with him. It's been all of our time with him. This is going to be our last meeting with him in Paris. And so, we constructed this scene where he agreed to go on camera with her, and she had, her final kind of prosecution of him in person. And so that was the conceit of the scene. I was operating one of the cameras, my camera, I had two other cameramen. I was operating the C camera. But I also knew that because this was a meta critique of true crime, I knew we were going to use my off-screen questions. I wanted my director's presence throughout the series to, not pretend this was like a full objective observation of these people, that I am a participant in this storytelling, that I am choosing to make a true crime piece. My voice is important, not because it's me, but because I'm a proxy for the filmmakers, for the creator community, the authors, the writers, the journalists who are also participating in the true crime economy. So I didn't want to obfuscate my own role in that. And so, I told my cameraman, if I ask the question, pan to me, would you use me as a reveal for this kind of larger point around, we have a journalist interviewing him, and then behind that is a director.
That was, by the way, it was genius. It was fantastic, by the way. I'm really, so that last scene, or that scene of the, whatever, that was an epilogue to her article. In other words, the article was long published and gone. She wasn't finishing her article, but you brought her back and asked her, do you want to ask some questions, or we'd like you to ask some questions? And I'm going to ask some questions, and we'll put those two together that will bookend your involvement, Lauren. Great. What are you working on now?
I'm working on a sports documentary. I can't say too much about it, but I'm really excited for it. So it's, combination of mental health, sports, crime, and, the kind of intersection of those two things. So it's a sports documentary. I'm really excited about, and have many other projects in development, some other stuff done, justice, an environmental doc. I've written my first TV scripted pilot that I'm also working on. So, working on lots of things, and I'm so very happy that Killer Lies is now on Prime Video, and Killer Lies can be seen by the masses. And then it's, it's great because they're presenting it without commercials. So it's, seamless. So it plays really well. Just as a,
So I do want to tell my audience, I'll put this in here. It'll come at the end and up with a thank you, but that you have I can find you in Facebook. So you have your Facebook page that they can go to, and you probably have a website too. Do you have a website?
Yeah, just benselco.com.
And so you'll obviously connections to all your past work, future work, this work. And again, it's on Prime Video. It's worth, if you don't have it, it's worth $1.50, whatever you got to pay for it. I got enough streaming services, so I don't have Prime Video. So I can tag this at the end. What you've talked about, if you can encapsulate your feeling about the trust, and I love that. So that what do you think the kernel of all this that is obviously presented through this gentleman? I use the term loosely, but what is the essence, the nut of it for you?
Yeah, the essence of this series for me is, we're profiling a really kind of bizarre, true crime, true con, true scandal, but it's married against the timeline of the rise of true crime as a genre. And so the fact that the inflection points of true crime, we can understand the history of true crime through a story was an unbelievable opportunity. And the takeaway is to try to do an examination of how we treat true crime, how we, as an audience and as makers, how do we make it, and as audiences, how do we consume it? Like, what are the tenets of it? And how do we improve our storytelling? How do we make it not just salacious and entertainment, but something that is, has some, entertainment quality to it, but, advances our understanding of each other, society, compassion, understanding the ills of society, and where the, areas of omission are in terms of understanding justice in America. And so I think, and justice globally, really. So I think it does three things really well, which is the meta critique of true crime, tells Stephane Bourgoin and this investigator's, in the Fourth Eye's, pursuit of justice in the public forum, and ask some really hard questions about the genre, both as makers and as audience members.
Well, I want to thank Ben Selko today for joining us today on Murder Most Foul on a very fascinating case. As I say, it's not a murder case directly, but I was fascinated when I first read about it. And Stephane has sort of dropped off the face of the earth. I understand that, if you Google, he won't take interviews anymore. Maybe someone can, but right now, as we stand now, he's not. So I want to thank you again for Ben for joining us. Have a great day.
Thanks so much, Jim. Appreciate it. Thank you.